Welcome to the Port of Los Angeles Monthly Media Briefing. I'm Phillip Sanfield, the Port's Media Director. Joining me here once again from our offices along the LA waterfront is Jean Seroka, Executive Director of the Port of Los Angeles. Welcome, Jean.
Thanks, Philip. As always, it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm especially excited today because in just a few minutes, we'll have the privilege of being joined by U.S. Port Envoy John Porcari. John was appointed just this August as Port Envoy to the Biden-Harris administration Supply Chain Disruption Task Force. John and I were with President Biden yesterday for the president's announcement regarding 24/7 operations throughout the supply chain and specifically here in Los Angeles. I know there's a lot of interest about that topic and others, so we'll address that issue in detail shortly.
Thanks, Jean. Before John joins us, let's cover three topics: an overview of our September volume, a look ahead at the fourth quarter, and a snapshot of port operations. And I'd like to remind the media, we've got a lot of questions in advance. There are a lot of new media on the call. We'll do our best to get to as many as possible in the next 40 minutes. The Q&A box below is available for additional questions, time permitting. Okay, Jean, let's start with the September key metrics.
Thanks, Philip. The cargo surge we've experienced for more than a year continues. September volume at the Port of Los Angeles landed just shy of 900,000 TEUs. The final number will change slightly as the TEU count from one ship is still pending. That's the best September in the port's 114-year history, edging out last year's previous mark by a little shy of 2%. The surge continues to be driven by the American consumer, which is good news for our economy. We've been averaging more than 900,000 container units for the past 14 consecutive months. The duration of this cargo run is quite remarkable. We've averaged 17 ships at berth daily in the month of September. That's 70% higher than pre-pandemic days. We welcomed 83 container vessels, including 15 extra loaders, showing the strength of the U.S. import market. Clearly a very busy month here in Los Angeles. And the trend continues on the import side. We came in at about 466,000 TEUs for the month, on par with last year's strong performance. Contributing factors, of course, the savvy retailers who have been bringing in year-end holiday goods since June. And Halloween retail sales broke records 30 days before our October 31st celebration. Unfortunately, U.S. exports continue to slide. Outbound cargo slumped to 76,000 TEUs, a 42% drop compared to last year. We haven't seen this low of an export number since the year 2002. Exports have now declined 31 of the last 35 months here in Los Angeles, and the ratio of imports to exports came in at a high of 6-1, the widest monthly gap that we can recall here at the Port of LA. This is obviously an area of great concern, and we've talked about this at the federal, state, and local level. We've got to create policy and incentives to get our American exporters back in the game. Empties, meanwhile, continue their high demand for trans-Pacific import back to the United States. In the month of September, we moved about 357,000 empties, a 27% jump last year, to pre-position those assets near the factories and bring back the next wave of American imports. So here's where we stand after 3 quarters of the calendar year. We've already processed at the Port of LA more than 8 million TEUs. That's up 26% compared to 2020 numbers. And despite all the challenges, we continue to deliver record amounts of cargo. This is made possible by the extraordinary effort and collaboration of our longshore dock workers, truck drivers, Los Angeles marine terminal operators, railroads, and so many others on the waterfront and beyond. I'm grateful to all of you for the support you continue to show day in and day out.
Thanks for that overview, Jean. Now let's look forward. What trends are you looking at for the balance of the year?
Philip, all indicators are pointing to a strong and steady volume flow in the months ahead. We're using data points that have been developed through the Port Optimizer, along with Damian Young's outfit and the daily industry conversations, so that we can assist stakeholders in planning appropriately for incoming volume. Our signal data shows solid cargo volume over the next 3 weeks. We're expecting about 920,000 TEUs for the month of October. That's compared to about 980,000 container units last year at that time. And that was our second best month ever. The outcome of the month of October will really be determined by the number of ships that remain at anchorage and the congestion factor on our terminals. The more cargo we can push off, the more ships we can bring in. For November, our initial estimate is at 900,000 TEUs, about the same as last year. And to close out calendar year 2021, we're projecting 10.8 million 20-foot equivalent units. That would be a 17% increase over last year, the best calendar year performance for a Western Hemisphere port. In addition, it would be about 14% above our all-time best calendar year in 2018 at just a bit more than 9.46 million TEUs.
Gene, one more topic before we bring in John Porcari. Let's take a brief look at today's operation. There's a lot of interest in what's happening both on land and water.
Yes, Phillip, this is a snapshot that Mike DiBernardo and his team put out every morning for our 0900 meetings, shared with customers and stakeholders alike. Today at the Port of Los Angeles, we're working 16 container vessels. Again, that's 60% above average in pre-surge days. The San Pedro Bay has 62 container ships at anchor. 31 of those, or exactly half, headed here to the Port of Los Angeles. But the big number today is that we've got 25 ships on the way over the next 3 days. And those container vessels at anchor keep creeping up. We're now nearly 12 days of ships sitting before they get berthing rights here at the Port of Los Angeles. Part of the good news story, and we'll talk a little bit more later, but the push system of moving cargo out to customers is starting to gain traction. Our rail dwell time for on-dock product is down to 4.4 days from a high of 13.5. We've cut the backlog of rail containers by 2/3 over the last 60 days, and we cut it in half over the last month. Some great work happening here by both the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroad to really chip away at all these rail containers. What that also does for us is it frees up some yard space to start managing that 2/3 of our business, which moves in and out by truck.
Thank you, Gene. And now, if you would, please introduce our guest.
Oh, it's my privilege, Phillip. John Porcari previously served as the Deputy Secretary of Transportation during the first term of the Obama-Biden administration. He was also a 2-term Secretary of Transportation for the state of Maryland and Chair of the Maryland Port Commission. John's working closely with us and with the U.S. Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, and many others on the Supply Chain Disruption Task Force. John, thanks for all you're doing, and welcome today directly from Washington, D.C.
Thanks, Gene. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
John, what's on everybody's mind are the events of yesterday and President Biden's announcement. You and I were together at a roundtable with CEOs based in Washington over the Zoom call, a private meeting with President Biden. Tell us a little bit about your vision here with respect to 24/7 operations at the port and in the supply chain.
Well, first, Gene, I think yesterday is worth noting in a couple of ways. For the President of the United States to be focused on activity at your port, the goods movement chain in general is really unprecedented. And that really shows the direct link between our nation's economy and the goods movement chain, which starts with our ports. So yesterday's announcement was really twofold. One, it was your announcement that the Port of Los Angeles is moving to a 24/7 push system, as you describe it, that will really help energize the rest of the goods movement chain. But the other half of yesterday's announcement was at the other end of the goods movement chain, the large beneficial cargo owners that are driving the volumes here. And over the last several weeks, we've secured commitments from some of the largest of those cargo owners to move to a 24/7 distribution model. That really helps the nation. It helps clear the docks. And I think all of us know, and it's certainly been clear from conversations over the last several weeks, that as a nation, we need to move to a 24/7 supply chain. You're doing your end. The cargo owners have stepped up and doing their end. And now we need to energize the rest of the system and pick up both the fluidity and the velocity of the system.
John, what key metrics are you watching? Specifically, what are the indicators that signal improvement, staying the course, or decline that we have to catch up on?
Well, first, dwell times is a great measure, and it's the various dwell times, whether it's on dock, whether it's rail, or at the warehouses and distribution centers. This system, as a system, and as you know, it's really a private sector driven system. It's only as good as its weakest link. And if containers are dwelling on chassis at distribution centers because they're not unloaded for 11 days or even 4 days, that slows the entire system. So dwell time is probably the single best key performance indicator throughout the system. We're also seeing the indications of the rest of the system moving more toward a 24/7 basis. And we want to make sure we're specifically measuring that as well.
Let's talk a little bit, John, about secure data sharing to improve efficiency. What are you hearing around the country about this approach, and can it work to be a nationwide opportunity?
It is absolutely a nationwide opportunity. And in private discussions, the leaders, the CEOs throughout this supply chain will, to a person, privately admit that we need better, more transparent data on a national basis. You can't fix what you can't measure, and we need to move toward that. You've made great strides with the Port Optimizer system and its various components. That is something. It's the basis of what can be used on a broader scale. But it's also true that the guiding principles of an open architecture system of transparency, real-time data, and at the same time protecting proprietary information can all be achieved. As you know, we've brought in the U.S. Digital Service to actually look at this and take an honest broker view of this. The goods movement chain on the ground would benefit tremendously from better real-time information that's much more transparent to everyone.
Right. And we see that outsized responsibility as well, John. As you know, we set up the nation's first cybersecurity operations center back in 2014. And today it's stopping more than 40 million cyber intrusion attempts per month here at the Port of Los Angeles. That's double what it was pre-pandemic. We also opened up one of the first cyber resiliency centers that follows the FBI's Neighborhood Cyberhood Watch program to bring the private sector in under conditions of anonymity so we don't hurt anyone commercially, but we share information on the cyber threat landscape immediately. So with all of that, and in the meetings yesterday, John, I was so impressed with International Longshore and Warehouse Union President Willie Adams from the international side and his take on the supply chain, the workforce's commitment. We were also joined by Port of Long Beach Executive Director Mario Cordero in some of those meetings yesterday as well, and just a real unified approach. With all of that conversation, the announcements from yesterday, what are the next steps that you're looking for specifically?
Well, with those commitments and announcements in hand as the starting point, not the end point, clearly, of the commitments that we have from the cargo owners, we're moving to the tactical part of it with your help and with Mario's help. And starting tomorrow, we have operating action meetings which focus on specific issues and working through whatever issues are barriers to 24/7 operation. This is not flipping a light switch, as you well know. What it is a series of individual, discrete, problem-solving actions that lower the barriers to 24/7 operation and increase those volumes. as a nation, having the flexibility and the fluidity of 24/7 operations is really important. I think we all understand that the whole supply chain in the United States, and in fact globally, was creaking along before the pandemic. The pandemic laid bare, with its increased volumes and with its different buying patterns, it laid bare a system that really needs to be modified. And the way we can do that in the short term together is to move toward more 24/7 operations. So that's where we're focused. We're going to knock down the barriers like bowling pins, and we're going to keep moving.
Thanks, John. And yesterday was truly amazing, as you've said. We met with President Biden, Vice President Harris, Secretary Buttigieg, Director Deese of the National Economic Council, and all the work with that agency, with Samira Fazli, Liz Reynolds, Brendan Duke. We've got the federal government's power of the whole of government approach today, and we could understand exactly what that means. And John, thank you in particular. Your volunteerism for the greater good of the American economy and our ports must go with strong mention. I know you've agreed to stay on just a few minutes. I know the media is going to have some questions for you, so we thank you again for your time this afternoon in Washington.
It's my pleasure, Gene.
Thank you both. Looking forward to these questions. A reminder to the media, please go ahead and we will try to get to the questions that are just coming in. So if you have some, please type those into the Q&A box and use please include your name and affiliation. First set of questions are from Paul Berger of the Wall Street Journal. They're directed at Gene. There are actually three of them here, so we'll just start with the first one. When will 24/7 operations begin, and how many terminals will participate?
Well, the anticipation is that everybody will be 24/7. But as John just said, first things first. We've got commitments from some of the biggest importers in the country, some of the biggest companies in the United States of America, and their ability to bring this cargo off our docks so we can bring the next ship in is really key. And it gets into that level of detail with the discussions we're having. My staff is talking to the terminal operators this morning. I landed from D.C. last night at about 11:30 here in Los Angeles to greet you all and begin discussions on the ground with our various stakeholders. So we're moving as fast as possible. Those 62 container ships at anchor right now have important parts and components that need to go to U.S. manufacturers, retail goods that have to go through the omni-channel distribution network to get to our doorstep or our store shelves. We're only 4.5 weeks away from Black Friday. We've got a lot of work ahead of us, but all of that conversation is pushing towards getting everybody to open up each day of the week.
Part two of the question, Gene, is will crane operators work all night, or will they do something similar to Long Beach and preload containers onto chassis for overnight pickup?
Now, that's going to be the work that's at hand, and for each terminal to understand. Each one has a specific cadence every shift, every day, and how best to groom the yard, to pre-plan chassis mounting, make sure roadability is taken care of, how we're working those ships. And please remember, the 11,300 container units on average that are loaded and unloaded from every ship at the Port of Los Angeles is still a world's best. And I also understand that there are complications. We have to get this orchestra of participants in the supply chain to adjust and get on the same schedule, same calendar. It's going to take some pulling. Others are volunteering, and that's the goal. Get everybody synchronized to the best of our ability so this container flow can start happening. Again, the push system of operations. We know whose cargo is on the docks, where it's located, and how long it's been here. Getting this cargo out with specific commitments of the import community is extremely important to all of us.
Gene, the last question from this series from Paul is about how do we ensure operations here are more successful than the pilot program has been thus far in Long Beach?
That's what I just said, Phillip. It's getting this entire orchestra of participants to get on the same calendar and keep moving. There will be no shortage of advice in this discussion, and we readily understand that. But it's pushing out every container, working on the metrics that John outlined, plus others that we keep here. That Port Optimizer was designed for two reasons. One, to help us create operational efficiencies, but number two, for the analytics that it provides. So we understand where we're achieving some of our goals, where we need to improve, and where those bottlenecks exist so we can attack them. All that detail on dwell times, container movement, and output is really the focus of how we use those analytics. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate you joining once again today.
Gene, before we get to a question for John, there have been a number of questions. Perhaps you could go over the current shift times as they've been for many years here, the start and times of the different shifts. That's been a question that's come up from 3 or 4 reporters.
Yeah, basically, and again, there are nuances with each terminal, with each local agreements on the ground, but generally speaking, and I am not to be quoted on behalf of the Pacific Maritime Association nor the ILWU, my thoughts only. The work is traditionally done dayside, as we call it, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Then there's a small break to clean equipment and telecommunications devices, get everything on the ground ready for the night side, which starts at 6 p.m., ends at 3 a.m. And then again, with flexibility up and down, the hoot shift, or the hoot owl shift, starts at 3 a.m. and ends at 8 a.m. That's what the collective bargaining agreement has in place for the sides on the employer and the union to discuss how workers and skilled folks are to get out on the jobs and how the companies will perform operations.
Thank you, Gene. I think that clarifies the current operations for a lot of the media here. John, this question is for you. It's from Lorianne LaRocco at CNBC. How can the U.S. government change the behavior of all the different facets in the supply chain to embrace 24/7?
Well, thanks for the question, Lorianne. First, it's worth noting that this is a private sector system, essentially, and the government role from the federal government is largely brokering discussions and encouraging cooperation between different parts of the system. So that's the first basic part of it. There's also an important infrastructure part of it. And if you think about the public investments, whether they're at the federal level, the state level, or the local level, in the case of the Port of Los Angeles, there's a real case to be made for public infrastructure investments from the ports and inland from there. This is not your grandfather's goods movement chain. It is, however, in many cases, your grandfather's infrastructure that we're working with. And so if you look at the president's bipartisan plan for infrastructure, which does have broad bipartisan support, there's a very substantial component for the maritime industry for the first time in a way that hasn't been done before. And it's a recognition that this global supply chain works only as well as the weakest link. And those infrastructure investments are a primary federal role. There's also what you're seeing right now, which is the kind of bully pulpit role of securing commitments from cargo owners that give the rest of the goods movement chain the confidence to open up 24/7. So, as I mentioned before, it's not flipping a light switch. What it is working all through the supply chain, knocking down those barriers and making sure that off-peak use of unused capacity is everyone's first preference.
Thank you, John. Lorianne follows up with a question for Gene. Gene, you touched on this somewhat. Perhaps you have something to elaborate on here. She says there are so many stakeholders at the Port of Los Angeles. What kind of timeline can you give us as to when all are on the same page with respect to 24/7?
Thanks for joining, Lorianne. And as John just said, it's not a single lever we can pull today to open up all the gates. But what we're doing is this, trying to squeeze every minute, every hour of efficiency out of this port complex that we can, sharing information, building on those strong, decades-long relationships, and with the strength of the federal government behind us. The work here will be fast. It has to be. We've got milestones ahead of us. We've got 62 container ships at anchor. We've got goods that need to flow for the holiday season. Small importers who may import 10 containers a year, but their family business relies on this next 6 weeks to make or break what is a generation's built-up business for them. So we understand the stakes that are in front of us and the work that has to be done, but it's bringing everybody together. There's no timeline when suddenly we'll wake up and everything will be 24/7. Lorianne, as you know, there are more than 125,000 companies that import cargo through the Port of Los Angeles every year, and another 75,000 that export through our facilities. The 20-plus shipping companies, including 10 new entrants just over the last months, individual companies chartering vessels and bringing them in. We're moving more than 100 trains a day out of the LA basin, no less than 3 miles in length. And we've got 18,000 truck drivers registered to do business at this port. Again, there's so many permutations here. This is the most complex infrastructure project in the world. But we're going to continue to chip away with every meeting, every phone call, every container movement, develop processes, and get more robust delivery based on these core tenets. Thanks for joining, Lorianne.
The next question is from Dan Ronan at Transport Topics. It's for John. The ports of LA and Long Beach project a doubling of container volume over the next 2 decades. Is relying on these two major ports an issue of national security when so much of the cargo moves through there? Are you encouraging diversification to other facilities to reduce the backlog at Long Beach and LA?
It's a great question, and we've been mostly focused on the next 80 days or so and what we can achieve together. But at the same time, we've been trying to build a foundation for the future-facing part of infrastructure that clearly is not equipped for today's demand, let alone tomorrow's. And along those lines, it's clear that the concept of resiliency is very important, and it means having multiple gateway load centers. It means the inland transportation system has to actually have the capacity to accommodate those kind of volumes. And one important part of this discussion that has not merited a lot of public attention yet, but we're working very hard on, is the federal-state relationship, the role of the states in economic development. When you're talking about global trade, import and export, that's about as basic as it gets in economic development terms. And so, for example, with the state of California and with states throughout the United States, through their statewide freight plans, through larger economic development plans, we're having some very productive conversations where we're pushing them hard to think about goods movement as an essential part of their state's economic development plan. That will play out in infrastructure that includes multiple modes of transportation, multiple pathways, and multiple places that goods can arrive and depart.
Thank you, John. The next question is from Deborah Kahn of Politico, and it's for Gene. Has there been thought given to the environmental effects of keeping the port open 24/7, and has there been or will there be outreach to environmental groups?
Oh, always. That conversation with community, section groups, NGOs, environmental folks is ongoing and every day here at the Port of Los Angeles. That's how we developed the first ever Clean Air Action Plan some 17 years ago that's reduced diesel particulate matter more than 87% to date over that time. But this conversation is about reducing the environmental cost of congestion. By going 24/7, the goal is to reduce all those ships out at anchorage and how long they sit there, getting them into port and plugged into shoreside power so they can reduce their engine requirements as you're seeing today. We also need to address the congestion at other nodes, including our Los Angeles marine terminals, to reduce rehandling of containers and other inefficiencies brought on by this deluge of cargo. The marine terminals are working as hard as ever, as is longshore labor. On average, the rank-and-file members of the ILWU have been on the job 6 days per week since the pandemic orders came out in March of 2020. Those men and women have put their lives on the line to make sure the American economy keeps moving. And bringing out those inefficiencies to smooth them and improve them is not an allegation of anything towards a particular stakeholder. These are facts that are out there that we all, as an international trade community, must fix and improve every day. And I'm so heartened by folks raising their hands, volunteering, offering to help and improve these areas of the supply chain. Much more work to do, but it is for the betterment of our surrounding harbor communities.
Thank you. The next question is for John from Sarah McGregor at Bloomberg. In addition to 24/7 operations, what other innovative solutions are being discussed or worked on? I've seen reports of lowering ages of drivers for interstate routes to age 18, peel-off zones, etc. Are these ideas being actively pursued?
It's a great question, Sarah, and we're actively pursuing multiple ideas One of them are inland pop-up sites that can be used to ground containers on an interim basis on either public or private property. That provides some temporary help while the longer-term capacity issues are addressed. So that's one way. Another way that you mentioned commercial driver's licenses, and we've been working closely with the states who actually regulate driver's licenses on simplified, streamlined procedures for CDLs, and that in the long term can help increase the pipeline for truckers as well.
Very good. Thank you. Next question is for Gene from John Gallagher. Given the expanded operations, when do you estimate the anchorage backlog will be cleared?
Now, that's the biggest question and forecast on everybody's mind, John, and thanks for joining today. What we're looking at now with this push system is lining up those containers with commitments specifically from the importers, working then with the truckers to make sure we have enough power. Correspondingly, getting commitments from the liner shipping companies to have an equal number of exports and empty containers returned so we can give those truckers the round-trip economics they need, reduce gate turn times. In effect, if we can continue to push out this cargo like we've shown in early days with our rail partners on the truck side, that'll give us more room on the terminal tarmacs to bring these ships in even quicker. But our outlook has been pretty consistent. We may plateau on import volume after the Thanksgiving holiday and between that and the year-end holidays and New Year's. We're going to pick up again in the first month of 2022 because we've got an early Lunar New Year the first week of February. Most retailers are telling me, the big box home improvement stores, to give you an example, that following the Lunar New Year holiday, or some semblance thereof, because the factories are still trying to keep up in Asia, that we'll see the second quarter of 2022 focused on replenishment of inventory at the store and facilities level. Think of how we get the packages out from those facilitation centers. So it's incumbent upon us, again, to squeeze every minute and hour of productivity out. The more cargo we can get out the gates via truck and rail leaves more room to get that next ship in. And our goal continues to be every day, chip down at that number of container ships at anchor. Again, as I said, though, this season that we're in, this all-important holiday season, has 25 ships coming across the Pacific that are due to land at anchor in the next 3 days. So we've got to keep working as hard as we can to get these goods through the American supply chain. Thanks, John. And to the previous question from Sarah on these initiatives, we've presented back in July to Secretary Buttigieg with a 5-point short-term plan and a 5-point longer-term plan that I'm happy to make available to the media. Phillip, we'll send this out afterwards. But it's really around the financial incentives that we've offered to reduce truck waiting times and get those round trips or dual transactions going. It's the expansion of the Port Optimizer with 4 new modules over the last 12 months designed for industry, by industry, based on their needs. We've also worked at the federal level on setting standards as well as working on these gate hours and had a really increased fluidity, but taking advantage of that latent capacity John mentioned, especially at nighttime, to push this cargo out as quickly as we can when the roads and freeways have less traffic on them. The truckers can then get more turn times. And in the future, it's all about building America's first training center and development process around the port workforce. While the ILW and Longshore can be a great anchor, but it's open to all trades and all comers. Think of getting truck licenses, certifications in crafts and trades. All to augment that is being delivered by organized labor today. And in addition, we must have an infrastructure plan. We're eagerly awaiting the House to take this up and vote on it for the look at what we could do here. There's more money put in this plan for ports and harbors than ever before. And the president commented yesterday in his press conference that the work we can do here will get us from a position where we've underinvested for the last 10 years to great investment over the next 10 years. So all of this is front of mind to us. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate those questions as well.
Thank you. We've got about 5 more minutes. We're going to have a handful of questions that we will try to get to here. The next question is for John. It's from James Allen from Random Lengths. That's a local publication here in San Pedro. John, James is asking, is there a particular weak link in the supply chain in Southern California that you could point to?
Well, I think every link in the supply chain in Southern California is stressed right now, and it has been for at least the last year and a half. The availability of off-port properties for grounding containers and container transfers is one, and it's not unique to Southern California, by the way. It may be more acute, but that's a nationwide phenomenon. And the ability to have enough chassis, enough truck drivers to actually make the operations work at the port is one limitation as well that I think we're all paying very close attention to. But it's this combination of unprecedented volumes, which none of us expect. You saw from Gene earlier, none of us expect to go away, and different buying patterns that have really upended the global supply chain. And nowhere is it more apparent than here in Southern California. So the short answer is every bit of the supply chain is stressed, and we need to work on every element.
Thank you, John. Next question is from Katie Arcieri from S&P Global Market Intelligence. Is there a labor shortage that affects the port's ability to offload goods, and are vaccine mandates inhibiting workers at the port?
Thanks for joining, Katie, and great question. As I've shared before, we've got three segments of labor that are so important to this port complex. First are the longshore men and women, and as I've described, we've not only added more registered and casual or apprentice longshore over the past months, but these rank and file members of the ILWU have been on the job an average of 6 days a week since the pandemic began in March of 2020. We've got skilled operators. Ramon Ponce de Leon, Local 13 president of the longshore members, has been working with the Employers Association to get training moving in skilled areas, machine operators throughout this surge, in environments on terminals where cargo is just flying through the facilities. Safety and health first every day. Training up our folks to make sure we have the best and the brightest on the job is good there, and we have ample longshore to do this work. Second are the truck drivers. And while some have opined on this, we have a nationwide shortage of truck drivers. In fact, just yesterday at our roundtable meeting headed by the Secretary and Director of the NEC, it was stated that we are short 30,000 truck drivers nationwide. We have an annual attrition rate, separately, of 20% per year, and the average age of a truck driver continues to grow. We need to rethink the entire professional opportunity for careers in truck driving. The look at compensation, benefits, how we reward, how we attract, retain, and recruit truck drivers as a profession is key and front of mind to all of us in the supply chain. Much work ahead there. Then the warehousing complexes. We sport 2 billion square feet of warehousing from the shores of the Pacific out to the California's desert region. And yet, with that largest complex in the world, they traditionally operate during the daytime only, while others are working at night, overnight, and evenings. At the same time, they've been particularly hit by COVID. They work in teams, and having to physically distance, some have left, some have gotten sick, and others have, quite honestly, moved into other segments of industry, as have truck drivers. Think of going into parcel delivery service as opposed to port drayage. So we've also got to put a premium look on that from a human resources perspective to see how we can better recruit and compensate these important folks, because it's an omni-channel network of distribution. It's not just moving a carton from one place to another. It's about the real connectivity of that cargo coming internationally and how we dish it out to the nation's 435 congressional districts. But great question, Katie. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you. We've got just a couple minutes. We'll try to get to a couple more questions quickly. John, also a follow-up from Katie here. Despite the efforts by companies, the Walmart, UPS, and FedEx with going to assisting in the 24/7 supply chain program, can consumers still expect to see higher prices for holiday goods and out-of-stock items?
Well, first, I'm not smart enough to be an economist, so I can't really opine on that. What I can tell you is that you have the commitment of the Biden administration. You have the commitment of the hardworking women and men in the supply chain to do their very best. And what we're doing together is to accelerate the velocity of that supply chain using the available capacity, which is at night. And it's really that simple. It's a matter of execution. I will tell you, I feel very good about the teamwork that we've had so far, about the level of cooperation. And I think the general recognition from professionals in the industry that it's time to do this. It's long past time. And coupled with the investments that we can make in the future to build a more robust system, we can actually get this done.
Thank you. A quick question that's come up twice here. Gene, maybe you can address this. Do we have any kind of a time frame on when we might expect the first terminal at the Port of LA to go 24/7?
Those discussions are ongoing. I think I touched on it earlier in my answers, Phillip. And again, it's matching up commitments with how we need to service these folks. The dwell times have been super high. We've got to push this cargo out as quickly as we can, take advantage of that latent capacity when we're not using our gates, and matching that up with truck power, chassis, and corresponding exports and imports. So we'll keep working with our folks on the ground, the Los Angeles Marine Terminal operators, who I've complimented wide and far for their efforts throughout this surge before, and they will continue to outperform expectations. But we got to get to the basic nuts and bolts of how we're doing this, and then we're going to go and look forward to continuing to expand our hours. As I've reported in this venue before, we have seen expanded hours across the marine terminals here at the ports of Los Angeles. Driving down early in the morning, I see booms down working on ships before the traditional 8 o'clock start time. I've seen gates on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. We've got to take advantage of those times and then continue to push the other private sector players to run their clocks more on this schedule as well. So we're not going to create artificial deadlines or put anybody in a box. What we're going to do is keep squeezing these efficiencies out, expanding the hours. We've still got 62 containers out there just beyond the breakwater and another 25 on the way.
The last question today comes from Ishi Mori from TV Tokyo. It's for Gene. What do you see as the biggest factor contributing to the delays in moving goods out of the port complex, and will 24/7 resolve the issue?
Mori-san, good to hear from you. Thank you very much for joining. It's an amalgamation of events. It's everything that started from the last administration's trade policy to shutting down the economy here and worldwide with COVID-19, and then trying to ramp back up at the speed of light to accept the American consumer's sheer buying power that's on display every day here at one of the world's largest trading gateways. So all of that comes to the confluence in what we see, and the work that we're doing today is to try to not only fulfill that demand of the American consumer, but also prepare for the future with better planning, better investment, smarter data sharing. And Mori-san, as you know, and we've talked about this before, it's not just happening here in Los Angeles. There are ships offshores on the east coast of the United States, outside of Shanghai. My friends in the Middle East report to me the same, as well as Southeast Asia and some European ports as well. This is continued demand by developed nations with consumer buying power, and our factories have the highest output in recorded history. We just have to do more. Thanks again, Mori-san.
Thank you. That concludes our questions. Gene, back to you for closing remarks.
Thanks, Phillip. And John, my sincere appreciation for your time today. I know you're working as hard as anybody right now in the administration, and your help with us goes recognized every single day.
Thank you.
To close, I'd like to briefly share how excited we are to have the cruise industry back in Los Angeles and the LA waterfront. Just a few weeks ago, we officially welcomed the first revenue-generating cruise ship back to our docks since March of 2020. For perspective on how valuable this industry is, a busy cruise weekend here in Los Angeles can bring as many as 20,000 travelers, as well as thousands of crew members right here to the LA waterfront. And that's great news because we're forecasting a record 200 ship calls in the year 2022. That's a huge jump from even our best cruise year in the 2000s, when we were averaging about 120 sailings per year. At the same time, we're completing infrastructure work on our LA waterfront promenade and town square. And we're setting the stage for West Harbor, a major retail, dining, and entertainment development on our waterfront's edge. All of this, the early vision of our council member, Joe Buscaino, and the work his office and so many others have done to get us to this point must be recognized. So welcome back, Princess Royal Caribbean and Norwegian Cruise Lines. We're looking forward to our best years out in front of us yet. And a special thank you to the media for your interest and participation once again today. Phillip and I look forward to being with you once again next month. Until then, stay safe, everyone.